let me just show you this picture. This is something that I really do not like to see, and this is something that we shouldn't be seeing in 2021. I saw a similar patient today for the first time who came in with a PSA of 3,900. This patient saw a few years ago, young man, 57, had some pain in his thigh. PSA was 2,700. First time he ever had a PSA drawn, and this was his bone scan, which shows all these black areas scattered throughout the skeleton. You don't want to see this. All these black areas represent spread of prostate cancer. So we have metastatic prostate cancer at presentation. This is what we used to see all the time 20, 30 years ago. This is how prostate cancer was diagnosed. When I was in medical school or early in training, it was diagnosed as an incurable stage like this with metastatic disease. So some of the victories we've had in this fight or war against prostate cancer, one of the great tools or weapons we've had is PSA. And just look at these numbers. This is some data that was published a few years ago in the New England Journal of Medicine. And just look at the blue line here. So this is the proportion of men, this is the number of men who are diagnosed, like that previous line, the number of men who are diagnosed with metastatic prostate cancer when they first are found to have prostate cancer. And you can see prostate cancer screening was brought in, in the early 1990s. And look what happened to the incidence of metastatic prostate cancer. It plummeted. So that in the next few years, the incidence of metastatic prostate cancer at diagnosis dropped by about almost 1/3 of what it was beforehand. Huge victory. If we look at what's been happening in Canada over the last 30 or so years, we can see that with the introduction of PSA screening in the 90s, the incidence, the number of men diagnosed with prostate cancer shot up enormously. And this trend continued up until the early 2000s. Okay, and after that, it sort of plateaued out. But look what's been happening in the last decade. There's been a steep decrease in the incidence, the number of men who are being diagnosed with prostate cancer. And it's not because men aren't developing prostate cancer. It's because it's not being detected, because they're not going for PSA screening. Now, at the same time, the bottom line is what's called the mortality. So this is the number of men who die from prostate cancer. And victory, look at this, over 20 years, the number of men who die on an annual basis from prostate cancer has decreased by over half. Okay, so that in itself is a huge victory. So in the past 25 years, huge victory. Number of men dying from prostate cancer has been cut in half. Why? Well, large part of this has to do with earlier diagnosis due to PSA screening. The other, probably equally important factor is better treatments for cancer confined to the prostate. So we're able to more easily, with less side effects, eradicate cancer while it's still confined and hasn't spread. And also better treatments for cancer after it has spread to other parts of the body. So here's what we're dealing with. Big increase in PSA screening over time, which led to an increased incidence of prostate cancer and decrease in mortality. Perfect. But in the last decade, we're seeing a reversal. Okay. And early information, when we look at the number of men diagnosed with metastatic prostate cancer, since that decline in PSA screening isn't very good. So this is the number of men who were diagnosed with spread of cancer in different time periods. So, in the early 2000s, we were doing pretty good. Only like 4 or 5% of men were diagnosed with metastatic disease, which is really good. But as the number of men who are having PSA screening decreases, look what's happening. The number of men who are diagnosed with metastatic prostate cancer has increased 2 or 3-fold. Okay, so that's certainly something to be concerned about for the future. So, you know, as I mentioned, this is not a fight, I think. It's a series of battles or fights. It's a war. And we have various and many victories along the way. But these are victories of battles, not the overall war. So we've had a huge gain, huge win in use of PSA and its ability to detect prostate cancer. It's really important that we don't lose this ground that we've captured over the previous couple of decades. We have new and better treatments for localized prostate cancer, and we have new and better treatments for cancer that is spread. And looking at the projects, the research that has been funded by the Right for Dad, these are the 3 areas that have been beneficial. These are the 3 areas that have been supported. We have, or the we, meaning the Right for Dad, the royal we, have supported a lot of research in better ways of detecting prostate cancer earlier, going even beyond PSA, looking at liquid biopsy, looking at ways of earlier detection, and in particular, earlier detection of more aggressive cancer with tendency to spread. Many projects have looked at better ways of treating prostate cancer. I'm very grateful to Right to Dad myself on a personal basis for having funded a lot of research on brachytherapy, which is a really good way of treating prostate cancer, and more recently has been shown to actually be a very effective, if not perhaps the most effective method of treating localized prostate cancer. And of course, we have new and better treatments for cancer that is spread, again, to a lot of research that has been funded around the country. So all of these have been supported, just looking at projects over the last 2 decades by the RIDE, and they've all contributed in their own way and helped achieve victory at various battles. There are many skirmishes and there are many fights left to fight. We're not there yet, but through the assistance of organizations like yours, this is a huge help, and this definitely has us on the right path to victory. So I think that's really all I wanted to say, Gary. Is there anything else you'd like me to say?
I think an immediate question to anybody who's diagnosed with prostate cancer is asking, what is the best treatment for what I've got? What should I do? Yeah,
that's you know what, that's the question I hear many times every week, and there's no one answer. It's a matter of looking at a lot of detail at the specifics of the cancer, the person, their expectations, and then talking it through. But there are many very good treatments for early cancer. We just got to find it at that early stage. And it's a matter of sitting down and working through what treatment might be best for that individual, rather than saying there's one treatment. There's no such thing as one treatment for all. There's no such thing as saying everyone should have surgery, or everyone should have external beam, or everyone should have this, or whatever it might be. That decision is something that has to be individualized.
Not long ago, there were people suggesting that the PSA test was shouldn't be continued or promoted. How do you feel?
Well, just look at the data.
Yeah.
Okay. So there were a number of recommendations. There were some task forces which came out with various recommendations in 2008, 2012. And we saw the result of that in the slide I showed. There's a decrease, big decrease in use of PSA by family doctors in particular, and a decrease in the number of men who are diagnosed with prostate cancer. But unfortunately, we're also seeing in many areas that this is also associated with an increase in the number of men who are being diagnosed with metastatic disease. Okay. Now, just because of the long natural history of prostate cancer, you don't really see an effect on mortality straight away. That's something that's later, that will happen later. But there's no doubt that there's a lot of extra cost and morbidity and suffering as a result of being diagnosed with metastatic disease rather than earlier stage disease.
How do you describe what Ride for Dad does? We don't fund huge operation or projects. We provide seed funding. How valuable is that?
It's really valuable because you're right. You know, like there's no one project that will be funded by Ride for Dad that's going to, you know, have a huge impact on its own. But what these sort of smaller projects can do is they can allow researchers to get some initial data and preliminary results, which will be needed in order to take to larger funding organizations. And that's something that happens all the time. And you know, it's not, I wouldn't underestimate the impact of some of these small projects. So for example, you know, just back to my own experience with brachytherapy, over 20 years ago, we developed a project in Sunnybrook, an idea of maybe just getting away with one HDR, what's called high dose rate brachytherapy treatment, big dose, and combining it with a short course of external beam. That was 20 years ago when we came up with this, and it was funded, by the way, by the Aurelia Simcoe Muskoka Ride for Dad. That's where the original funding for this came from. And this is now being adopted internationally as the standard way of treating prostate cancer. So this wouldn't have been possible without funding from Ride for Dad.
That actually was initiated by the Ride for Dad down in Aurelia, but it was supported by all of the chapters across Canada, and we supported it in a big way over a period of 4 years. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, for sure.
Any questions from the audience?
Has a question, and it might be a simple question, but it's regarding when folks go into the doctor, and a lot of the doctors, and I think we've discussed this many times before, why are some doctors so against the PSA?
There's a huge amount of confusion, and in fact, at end of May, I was asked to speak at a big national conference of primary care doctors. I think there were about 700 primary care doctors from around the country, and I was speaking to them about PSA. Okay, and I think there's a lot of misunderstanding and confusion on the part of the family doctors, the primary doctors, on PSA and its benefits. And you know, just laying down some of the data similar to what I've just showed you in a little bit more detail, in fact. But the biggest comment and feedback I got afterwards, the biggest change that the listeners were going to implement was use of PSA. And so I think there's confusion, there's lack of understanding of the guidelines. There are these older task force recommendations that have been given too much weight. And you know, most family doctors, a lot of primary care doctors are confused by different messages that they receive.
So when that happens, and they say, I wouldn't bother doing that, what does the patient do? So
the guidelines, as they are, I mean, there are many different ones, but the ones that are followed or should be followed would be that the family doctor has a discussion of the pros and cons of a PSA test. So it's not a case of, you know, I wouldn't do that, but it's a matter of saying, well, you know, there is a potential downside to PSA. You may, you know, the big argument, the big problem, the big concern with doing PSA on everybody is, firstly, there's a cost associated with it, but more importantly, you might end up picking up cancer and over treating cancer. But you know, we've learned a lot about that may have been true 20 years ago, but it's not true anymore. I don't think we overtreat prostate cancer. If anything, the danger is that we might undertreat and underdiagnose if we don't use PSA sufficiently and you know, in a targeted, selective fashion.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I just wanted to add to the doctor and to Gary. My husband was in a similar situation where he's now 60, but this probably started 6 years ago. The discovery has a very large prostate, a lot of all the symptoms that certainly, and this had really nothing to do with me being on the road for dad. I just certainly knew all these symptoms and I certainly wasn't going to ignore them. Our doctor wasn't too keen on doing the PSA test. So I really had to advocate for my husband to ask our family doctor to get a referral to a urologist. And at that point, that is when it happened and not before. So advocate, advocate, advocate.
Advocacy, totally agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, unfortunately, there are a lot of people out there that either don't, you know, they 100% trust what the doctor says, and if the doctor says, oh, you don't need that, or, you know, a lot of people are either naive or they just want to believe everything and they just go about their way. But if you're educated, you have to make sure that you're, you know, doing the test and being responsible. And I don't know, I always tell people, if your doctor says no, you should pursue it. Just like women with us, we're only supposed to get a pap test now every 3 years. And I will pay for it every second and third year myself, because after 3 years, it's already going to be too late.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So just to end that comment, my husband is being watched very carefully. He does not, no indicators for prostate cancer. His PSA does fluctuate, but he is being followed very closely by his urologist. And here's my father. He also grew up always having a large prostate, and he was diagnosed with prostate cancer at the age of 80. Well, there you go. There's no rule book on it.
Thank you, Tina. Red Deer, John?
Yeah, I went in for that PSA test and my doctor was all over it. You betcha. And after the results, I went in for the results and she said, from this point on, you will come in and I will recommend that you go get it every year.
Yes, good. Any other questions? None being said. Gary's already thanked you, and I'll thank you. We really appreciate this on this call, Dr. Morton. It's nice to hear information of what we're working so hard at.
Colleen, my pleasure, and thanks again for the opportunity and invitation to see you all and chat to you.
Very welcome. Hope we see you soon.
Bye
Thank
for now.
you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.